Welcome. We're going to get started. Uh, I'm Joel Baden, Director of the Center for Continuing Education at Yale Divinity School. On behalf of the center and our partners, Andover Newton Seminary, Yale, and Berkeley Divinity School, welcome to Overturning Your Immunity to Change with Dr. Robert Kegan. Thanks for being with us. A couple of people from our team are with us today, including Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator. Please reach out to Megan if you're having any technical issues with Zoom. If you're new to the Center for Continuing Education, or if you're looking for other opportunities to learn or resources for ministry, I'd encourage you to visit our website, and we're going to drop that link into the chat a bit later. And finally, we are recording, so please do remain muted during the session unless Dr. Kegan invites you to speak. Now I am privileged to introduce our speaker today. Robert Kegan is the Meehan Research Professor of Adult Learning and Professional Development Emeritus at the Harvard University Graduate School of Education. The recipient of numerous honorary degrees and awards, his 40 years of research and writing on adult development, influencing the practice of leadership development, executive coaching, and culture change throughout the world, has unleashed the hope that we can all keep growing at any age. Across Harvard, he teaches regularly in executive development programs in the schools of business, government, education, and medicine. His seminal books include The Evolving Self, In Over Our Heads, and with his longtime co-author Lisa Leahy, Immunity to Change, which is now available to 2.2 billion readers in their native languages. Bob has been on the faculty of the World Economic Forum's Davos Conference, has had his work featured in such diverse periodicals as the Harvard Business Review, the New York Times Sunday Business Section, and Oprah Magazine. And his most recent co-authored book, An Everyone Culture, Becoming a Deliberately Developmental Organization, is now available. For the past 20 years, Bob has also served as a trusted advisor to CEOs and their teams in the private and public sectors in the US, South America, Europe, and Asia. His clients are among the most recognized and respected leaders in the world. I'm not allowed to name any of them. As a last point, and not for nothing, when I was a child, Bob taught me and countless others how to tell a male lobster from a female lobster. He is truly a man of many talents. We're lucky to have him with us. It's a true story. Bob, thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you for that, Joel. It's quite something listening to your whole professional life story. I remember a friend who was listening to something similar asked if it gave me a big head to keep being introduced this way with all these various accolades. And my thought was always that if you understood the family that I grew up in, you would know that you have little to worry about kind of on that front. I remember when my first book was published in another language, I called up my father and I told him, Dad, my book's been published in German. And he said, well, that's terrific, son. Congratulations. I've read your book. And my question is, when will it be published in English? So, your family can keep you humble. That's on the parental side. Then, of course, I have children. I remember when my daughter was a teenager, I came home from work and found her hanging out with some of her friends in the living room. And I liked her friends, and I didn't want to be this father who just kind of like walks in and disappears. But apparently I stayed a little too long in the living room. And as I was walking up the stairs, I heard my daughter say to her friends, can you believe people pay money to hear him speak? So between, the generation above and the generation below, it's kept me quite humble. And I am humbly grateful for the opportunity to work with so many of you in your own important work and commitments, and to have a chance to kind of share with you the work that Lisa Leahy and I have been doing now for over 30 years now, I guess, building on adult developmental theory to help us kind of, answer a simple but a vexing problem, and that is, why is it difficult for people to make the changes they actually want to make? it's more understandable why people find it hard to make changes that they have a lot of ambivalence about. But there's a whole set of ways in which any one of us could say that we are wholeheartedly on board with making some particular change and still find it difficult to do so. In the beginning of our book, Immunity to Change, we quote these studies from the health sector that show that if heart doctors tell their seriously at-risk heart patients that they'll literally die if they don't change their ways of living around diet, exercise, smoking and the like, it still turns out that only about 1 in 7 patients can actually make the changes. And I think we could agree that the other 6 people have just as strong a desire to go on living and seeing their kids and grandkids growing up. So it's all kind of a signal that we need more understanding what gets in the way between our genuine intentions and what we're actually able to bring about. And that's a kind of space that my colleagues and I have been hanging out in for quite some time, and we think we've learned something about that. And I'm going to have the opportunity, with your cooperation, to kind of introduce you to a novel way of thinking about personal improvement that runs contrary to the model that is usually rattling around in the backs of our heads, which is some version of kind of a dieter's model or a kind of a willpower model that we might look in a mirror and decide that there's something we want to change. We might have a sincere intention and make a commitment to make that change. That's kind of the New Year's resolutions part. And then if it's going to be more than just a wan hope, we'll come up with some smart behavior change plan, like a diet. A diet is a behavior change plan, regulating the way we eat. And then we commit ourselves to that diet, try to keep it in mind, try to, work the program, kind of, stick with it. And the tricky feature of this approach is that initially it can often look like it's working. People do, after all, lose lots of weight on diets. The problem is that most people regain the weight that they've lost. Studies show that most people regain more weight than they actually took off, which might be one of the more useful extra benefits of this session. And if you do want to lose weight, you're going to see why dieting is probably a least promising approach. And instead, I'm going to show you a process and invite you into it. I'm going to be quite soon shifting from being something like a professor, talking to you, and more like a facilitator over your shoulder, kind of helping you kind of with your own work. But I'm going to show you a completely different approach that, yeah, rests on about 40 years of research in adult development and neuroscience. But to get us started, I want to just give you a little sense of kind of where all this can go. So you might just nod if you can see that. Can you see that? I can see you. Yes, you can see that. I see your thumb up. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to briefly introduce you to 2 team leaders that I worked with, and I'm going to introduce you to them through the real sets of feedback that they received, from their team members. And they both worked in a professional services organization, so you'll see references to clients and people that they would normally be seeking to help. So here's the first leader's set of feedback. Makes decisions without adequately consulting or preparing the team, constantly drives the team hard, no let up. I always feel under stress, extremely critical in ways that do not always feel constructive or respectful, might indeed be smarter than the rest of us and among the more talented with clients, but always letting us know it. He values team members more as tools or means to an end, not really as people or true colleagues. No coaching, team killer. I hate to go into his office, likes to put us in our place and show us who's boss. And a majority of his people checked that they would actively avoid working with this person again if they could. So this is, real life and real feedback for this first individual. Now I want to introduce you to a second person, again, through a real set of feedback that he received. A caring leader and coach, knows how to structure an engagement that's not only extraordinarily valuable, for the client, but exciting and educational for the team. His door is always open to all team members concerning both professional and personal development. At the end of the project, he suggested a risk-free personal development session with each of his team members to act as a kind of consultant toward oneself. He warms up a room when he enters for the client and the team. Gave the team immense freedom, a charismatic leader and role model dedicated to the team and its development, insightful and caring, and a majority of his people indicated that they would make working with him again a priority. Now, what I'm going to say next has probably occurred to some of you already, and that is that these two sets of feedback are for the same person. For the same person, about 8 or 9 months apart. And if you were to ask this person what was the most significant input that set him on a different trajectory that would cause him to change as much as he did, that he would show up this differently to his people, I know that his answer would be that it all started by going through the process that I'm going to be inviting you into in the next couple of minutes, a process which gets beneath the surface of our behaviors and helps us understand a little more our own internal operating model, if you will, our own internal mindset as it relates to some particular aspiration of our own. And I'm going to actually give you like a 3-minute kind of, kind of top level summary of what this process is all about for those of you who might be more whole to part learners. So you have kind of a sense of what is actually going to happen in this session, which I would invite you to consider as something more like a workshop, where you're literally going to be making something. You're going to be making a kind of mind map or a kind of picture. You could call it something like the psychological equivalent of an X-ray, in the sense that an X-ray lets us see beneath the visible surface more to what's actually going on underneath. And I'll give you a little sense kind of his X-ray that served as a platform for his own changes that enabled him to show up as differently as these two sets of feedback suggest. So if you're going to develop something like an X-ray, you would need something like a blank film in the beginning that's going to develop. And that blank film is basically a 4-column kind of sheet. You have each of you been sent already your own electronic version of this. And when we get started, if you don't have it at hand, don't fret. Megan is going to provide it for you in the chat, and you can access it for yourself. But it always starts with that first column and giving you a chance to identify some kind of improvement aspiration for yourself. I think this question was already sent to you in advance. Hopefully you've had a little chance to mull on a question like, if you could get significantly better in just one aspect of the way you carry on in your work, what would that one aspect be? Leaving aside any of your own skepticism as to whether you could accomplish it, leaving aside the fact that you've probably tried in the past and not been, happy with the results. That part is kind of my job. Your part was to identify your own version of a change aspiration, some kind of improvement goal. This particular individual I just introduced you to was quite shocked and disappointed, I would say even personally hurt by that set of feedback. That came as a big surprise to him. It was not the way he wanted to be with people. And so you can see his own improvement goal there that came directly out of that feedback. And in a few minutes, I'm going to be asking you, don't do it now. I'm just giving you a sense of the overall picture. But in a moment, I'll be asking you to identify what your own personal improvement goal would be. The next thing I asked him to do, and which I will shortly be asking you to do, is to fill in the second column, which takes a little bit of courage because the second column is about creating as honest and granular and full a picture as you can of what it looks like in blunt American speak, what it looks like when you are screwing up relative to your improvement goal. What are all the kinds of things you do that run contrary to that goal? What are all the things you neglect doing that by neglecting doing them runs counter to the goal? And just to give you a little flavor of this, these are the kinds of things that he entered, that he tends to hold impossibly high expectations for everyone, that he can be very judgmental, comes to very quick black or white decisions, like, for example, who is worth listening to on my team. And once I've decided, he's honestly, saying there, I seldom, change my mind, that I don't actually let myself get very close to others, and that I tend to lord it over my people. I can kind of show off, flex my intellectual muscles, call attention to my accomplishments. So this is just an example of what he entered in his second column, and kind of creating a little bit of a hypnotic suggestion in each of you to get ready for your being as brave and honest in identifying the things that you do or fail to do that in either case run contrary to your improvement goal. The purpose of this is not to make you feel badly or to beat yourselves up. You will see that the more honest you can be and the more you can get into that second column, the more interesting your picture or x-ray is going to be when your sheet of paper shifts from just being a bunch of seeming notes in response to a possibly random seeming set of questions, and shifts from that to actually becoming a single coherent picture of a single thing. And that picture, as I say, will be more interesting to you the more honest you can be and the more you can get into your second column. Now, I'm going to hold you in suspense a bit as to how we actually get to the third column, because the third column is about the idea drawn from brain science, and we'll talk more about this, that in addition to the conscious intentions that we can form, from one part of our brain, which intentions get reflected, for example, in that first column, that in addition to all that, commitments that you could say that we have, that we're aware, you know, uh, that we hold them. Because, someone might say, I have, a commitment to be more generous and patient. Then in addition to the commitments we have, you could say that there are commitments that, so to speak, have me. That is to say, they are running me more than I am running them. And that's why we call these the hidden commitments, because they are typically out of sight and running us. So since they are hidden, you might quite properly have the question, how am I gonna find those? But I'm gonna help you with that. And I'm not gonna go into how at the moment. I just want to give you a little flavor though for what they actually look like once we have found a way to make them emerge. Because otherwise you could wonder, well, how did he ever get to these things, which I'm about to show you? So holding that for a moment in suspense, what were some of his commitments that he became aware were actually running him and running alongside the genuine and sincere conscious commitment over here in the first column? So he came to see that in addition to the commitment in his first column, there was a way in which there was a commitment that kind of had him to be seen by others as superior. Another one that he came to recognize was that there was a part of him that was in the grip of a kind of commitment to be envied and admired for his success and accomplishments. Also, he saw that there was a part of him that was actually in the grip of a commitment to not be too direct. In fact, even come across a bit as complex and mysterious, to not be too simple, to not be too common. This word common turned out to be an important one for him because, just as it happens, this individual was a European fellow who came from a family that many generations back we would have called aristocracy. And even though in his current generation he had lost most of the material trappings of aristocracy, when he came to recognize that there was a part of him psychologically that was still identified with the notion that he was a part of some higher class, and that the last thing that he wanted to be was common. Now, again, he didn't know these things when we started the process, and I'm not expecting that you could write down your third column commitments at the moment, but you'll see that the process helps make them emerge, kind of flushes them out of hiding. And when that occurs, the picture begins to take on some coherence. Because, as he said, this is a picture of me with one foot on the gas pedal. I really do want to be more generous, patient, and approachable, but I see now that I have another foot on the brakes. And that these behaviors here are not going to just disappear by trying to make them change, because in fact, all those things in the second column, while they run counter to this goal here in the first column, all these things in the second column make perfect sense in light of these third column commitments. I hope you can see that if I don't want to be too direct and come across as complex and so on, well, maybe then I would quite naturally not let myself get close to others. So he starts to see how all these behaviors are not going to go away just by trying to make them go away, because to a part of himself, this part of himself, these behaviors here in the second column feel necessary. And I will warn you that when we come to the third column, it can be a little bit uncomfortable. If I had to draw some kind of a line that sketches something like the emotional journey I'm about to invite you into, we all start out somewhere with respect to, your change aspiration, somewhere, you know, uh, less than you would hope it would be. You want to close some kind of gap, get to higher ground. And my hope is, and my past experience gives me confidence that the process we'll go through will help you get from here to here, just in the way that you saw this person's change through his feedback. But we're not going to get there through some linear upward sloping line. We have to, in language that might be more resonant to this particular group, we have to kind of go down into the valley of the shadow of death here before we can climb out up to higher ground. And when you get to your third column, you are going to be down here. It can be a bit discouraging to see that without you realizing it, you have over time built a system for protecting yourself or taking care of yourself. That is the psychological immune system. And that system is brilliant in many ways and has helped you in many ways. But the one thing you're going to see is that the system, as you can see with this particular system, is not fit for the purpose of accomplishing this goal, because this system is actually, for perfectly good reasons, going to keep generating the very behaviors that make it impossible to accomplish the goal. So that is temporarily a little discouraging, but I will tell you, the second that you see the system, you start climbing up the right side of this U, this messy U. And the way that we're helped to climb up there is to consider that the systems that we have constructed rest on a set of assumptions, many of which we may not even be aware of. And once we can surface those assumptions, which you will also be doing in this session, those become kind of the gateway to pursuing or exploring a bigger question than, can I get better at this? And that bigger question is this system of self-protection, which I have built unknowingly over many years and which has helped me in many respects, but does have limitations, is this system the last system of self-protection I'm going to, construct and live in for the rest of my life? Or might it be possible for me to actually construct a roomier system of self-protection, which is another way of talking about, is it possible for me to grow and develop? And I'm here to tell you that it is. And that uh, the bigger kind of question is then, how might I construct a more expansive internal mindset that will still take good enough care of me, but enable me to limit, reduce, or even eliminate many of these things so that I actually can bring this about? And that occurs by identifying and then exploring in ways I'm going to help you with before we end some of these limiting big assumptions. And I'm going to show you some of the ones he came to. And again, these weren't assumptions he was aware of when we started, but they turned out to be very useful for him to consider. And to consider, as I will remind you when we come to the fourth column for yourselves, that these are assumptions which we're not even, presuming 100% of us even ascribes to. Often people will say, intellectually, I know that people are not going to lose all confidence in me if I make one mistake. But at some emotional level, I seem to operate as if, I believe that's true. Big assumptions are often like that. They're often a bit embarrassing because our good rational mind already knows that actually they are a distortion. But some part of us has not taken full delivery of that, and we are still very much influenced by assumptions that maybe only even a small part of us ascribes to. So for him, it was useful to kind of recognize that some part of him held or was in the grip of assumptions like, I assume if I become a man with a common touch, then I won't be seen as superior. Some part of me assumes that I'm valued primarily for my intelligence and problem-solving ability anyway, not my ability to, get along with people. Some part of me assumes the common touch is actually incompatible with intellectual superiority. And what turned out actually to be the most powerful for him to explore, the assumption that I must actually continue to feel superior in order to feel good. And I think you can see how, if he were able to kind of separate himself even a little, even just from some of these assumptions, that would enable him to take his foot off the brakes a bit with respect to these commitments, which would lead to changes in this column, which lead to real progress here, which progress was demonstrated by the second set of feedback that I showed you. Okay, so that was like a quick summary of 30 years of research. And this is the end of my kind of professorial part of this. And I'm shifting now to being much more of a facilitator. So let's get into the nitty gritty of things. I'm about to invite you to kind of take up a similar exploration for yourselves. I'm going to be kind of introducing the different columns to you, giving you some time to kind of work through your own entries, and then I will be breaking you out with help from Megan into a small group. Typically, it'll be 3 people, you and 2 others, where you'll have the opportunity, just to the extent that you are comfortable, to share with each other your own developing work. You'll find that your colleagues will help you and you will help them. And so we'll go back and forth between kind of a large group, helping you kind of make entries into your columns, and then the work that you'll be doing in your small group, where you'll keep returning, to the same colleagues. And over time, you'll begin to develop uh, your own kind of picture. Now, all of this starts then with your identifying your own first column goal. I'm going to take a moment here and get to a good slide for us. Let's see here. I think this would be a good one. So hopefully you did get the memo, so to speak, to think some about your own improvement goal. I see several of you nodding, so that's great. And that you maybe optimally, you already know kind of what that improvement goal is that you want to enter in your own first column. You'll see on the screen. I won't bother reading them. You can do that, but uh, some just common examples of things that people bring into a session like this. I'm not suggesting that any of these are necessarily yours, but I think the value of putting them up there is to show you that different as they all are, they have something in common, and that is that none of them are purely technical kinds of goals, where if you were to just learn some additional skill or two and kind of input that into your existing system, you would be able to crack it. Each of them are the kinds of goals or aspirations that, in order to accomplish, you'd probably have to become a little bigger and better version of yourself. It's the kind of goal to sort of grow on that kind of invites you, kind of into a fuller expression of yourself. They're all about some way you personally want to get better. And you are going to get much more out of this whole session if you will pick something for yourself that is also of a non-technical nature. I mean, it may have a technical dimension, but that it probably calls upon you, to grow some into achieving it. Uh, what you pick should also be like just personally important to you, like even, let's say on a 1 to 5 scale of importance, where a 1 would be this is not really very important to me at all, and a 5 would be it would be very important to me and very worthwhile to accomplish this. What you enter in the first column should be at the least a good solid 4, if not a 5, in importance. Now, you should have at hand a kind of electronic version of that slide. Here's just an example of another leader who his improvement goal was his company was getting much bigger. He couldn't control all of it. He needed to be more delegating, and so it looks like 3 different goals, but it's all about the same thing, kind of open to new ideas, new definitions of roles, new lines of authority. That was kind of his goal. And he would have entered that, in this first column. So I'm going to stop talking now for a minute, keep the space quiet, invite each of you to access your own version of this map. If you have any problem doing that, just check in with Megan. You should see a link to it in the chat. But let me just give you a minute to kind of put a stake in the ground and identify your own improvement goal, and then I'll be back in 1 minute. Okay, so hopefully you each have kind of identified something. Many of you were ready to do that just when you came in. If it's possible, Megan, to just put that first poll up, that would give us a chance to check in on what your own importance score would be actually for your goal. I can see you've already hopped onto this. And it looks good. I'm glad that somebody was honest and said, really, I'd give this a 2. It's not that important. And my recommendation to any of you whose votes would be lower than 4 would be to kind of search your soul a bit and see if there wouldn't be something that actually would be of a greater importance to you. I generally find that it's not hard for people to identify those, but they don't write them down because they think, well, I've tried to accomplish that, and it's a bridge too far. I've not succeeded with it. But in a sense, you will hold what I'm offering you to a tougher test by identifying exactly that goal that you would like to make progress on, which would be more important to you, even though you have a lot of doubt at the moment as to whether you could accomplish it. But okay, let's see, most of you have voted 90 out of 104, and most of you are at a 4 or a 5, and that's great. So I'm gonna end the poll here. We can take that off the screen. And I want to take one more step with you before I move you into your first breakout. And that step is to move to the second column. And you'll remember that the second column is about kind of fearlessly identifying all the kinds of things you're doing instead or failing to do instead, that in all cases work against your improvement goal. Sometimes people misunderstand the request in column 2 and they create a list of here are all the things I'm doing to further my goal, yay and hooray, and here are the things I'm doing that are working against it. I'd be willing to bet on all of you that you're doing things to advance your goal, but let's just be clear. Let's agree that's the case and be clear that that's actually not what's on the table at the moment. Rather, everything you enter in column 2 will be something that works against your improvement goal. It's going to be counterproductive, either by counterproductive doing, counterproductive action, or counterproductive inaction. So just to give you a couple of examples here, if we go back to that CEO who wanted to be open and more flexible. Yeah, he wrote in there things like, I can have very curt responses to new ideas, have a kind of closing off, cutting off, or overruling tone. It's very, very particular, but those are things that are obviously running counter. I don't ask open-ended questions enough or seek opinions of other people enough. I communicate to others too much or too frequently that they need to touch back to me. I'm too quick to give my opinions when that may not even be what people are asking for. So all of those things he entered in his second column. I'll give you one other example that's less necessarily from kind of that business context. If I can find it here. Yeah, so ignore the third column for a moment, but just get this out of your view here. But let's just look. This is a person who wanted to get better at eliminating their imposter syndrome or, feeling like, that they were a fake, but basically greater self-confidence, taking on new roles with less self-doubt. That was this person's goal. Then you can see this very rich set of entries in column 2. I tend to stay within my comfort zone. I over-consult on areas where I should be making the decision myself. Um, I take a stance of inferiority or discounting myself, even when I have more knowledge than others on the topic. I'm always second guessing. It's a wonderful example of a set of behaviors, actions, and inactions, all of which work against the first column goal. So let me again shut up and create a quiet space here for each of you to take a couple of minutes and bravely enter as much as you can into your second column. Everything you enter should be counterproductive relative to your first column goal. Okay, I actually gave you a full minute. I hope that was helpful, and I am very shortly going to be asking Megan to move you into your breakout rooms. Before I do that, just a few quick ground rules for, kind of setting expectations here for these breakout conversations. So you'll obviously be in two roles in these conversations. You'll be in the role of a speaker, and twice as often you'll be in the role of a listener. So in each of these roles, let's start with in your role as a speaker. I think the main ground rule is that it's completely up to you how much or how little of what you're working on or what you've written you want to share. Of course, the more you do share and the more people are willing to just literally share their screen and put your developing map up on the screen for your colleagues to see, the more you're going to get out of this. But that's completely up to you. And I don't want you ever to feel like I'm doing something to you in this session. I'm rather trying to do something helpful with you, and you should be setting your own kind of pace through this process. So it's completely up to you how much or how little you want to share with your colleagues. In your role as the listener, I think the main ground rule, I'll just exaggerate this, but the main ground rule is that it's not your job to fix your partners. Okay. So it's not your job to uh, give advice or ask some leading question that you hope will somehow usher your colleagues into the light that you have long enjoyed yourself or whatever. Uh, in other words, it's not your job to analyze, problem solve, uh, give advice. And now that it could feel to you I've removed most of your ways of being of help, you could ask me, well, then what good am I? But you all would know best the answer to that question, given the work that you do. You have something very precious to offer your colleagues, and that is your company, your companionship, and your curiosity, even your witness, maybe. Uh, you're essentially joining each other, so you each have a little company on your own journeys. This does not mean that you must remain silent in listening to your colleagues and just or say maintain eye contact on the screen. Uh, you should feel perfectly free. In fact, we've done a lot of research on what makes the smaller group discussions more and less effective. And the things that people commonly said about small groups that they most appreciated was that, people kept them honest, people, asked them questions that were genuinely out of curiosity. So the very first thing is, as you listen to your colleagues, do you understand what they're saying? Because sometimes, these things can be quite abstract, or you could listen to someone's first column goal and you could feel like, I kind of get that, but I could understand it to mean this, or I could understand it to mean that. And in normal, polite conversation, we just kind of hold back and hope it'll clarify itself over time. But we don't have an enormous amount of time. You're going to feel like it goes quite quickly, even though it's, several hours. So if you don't understand, feel free to ask for, examples or whatever. It will often help the person create a stronger map. If you don't see how the second column entries actually work against the first column goal, it will be good to, say that you're not, making that connection. That will often help your colleague to sharpen up their second column entries. So you're going to have 12 minutes in this first breakout. You can do the math. That means you should each have about 4 minutes to let each other in on your improvement goal, and you could share the importance score, but not just the number, but like why. Why is it important to you to make progress on this goal? And then to take them through as many of your second column behaviors, as you're willing to share. Keep in mind when you're listening, you're not trying to problem solve, give advice, or fix anything. You're just trying to see if you now understand what your colleagues' change aspirations are and what are the kinds of things that they, like every other human being, do that actually run counter to their own goal. So we'll see you back here in 12 minutes. If you get kicked out of your group by the Zoom platform, which sometimes happens, just let Megan know and she'll bring you back to your group. See you in 12 minutes. So I hope you had a good beginning go of things in your small groups. And if you kind of think about what we've done so far, I mean, it's actually not that spectacularly different from what would happen in most improvement processes, which would typically begin by identifying some kind of worthy aspiration that hasn't yet been sufficiently accomplished. And you did that in your first column. And then if it's going to be more than just a hope and a prayer, a common next step is to identify barriers to accomplishing the goal. And you've done a version of that in column 2, a sort of subset of barriers, the ones over which you have the most control, because they're the barriers you yourself are creating by your counterproductive actions and inactions. So what we've done so far, isn't all that unusual from what would go on in most improvement processes. And it's worth then our kind of asking ourselves, okay, and then what is the common next step? Having identified the goal and identified the barriers, what comes next? Simple. I mean, you were brave enough to identify all these counterproductive things you're doing in the second column. So just cut that stuff out. Come on, just stop it. I love it. I see Judy throwing her head back in laughter. Laughter is good for the soul. Now, in real life, the person who is yelling stop it at us the most and the loudest, of course, is ourselves, right? We know that we want to be less of a micromanager, and yet there we see ourselves, jumping in again and taking over, and we tell ourselves to sort of stop it. So, this is basically a comic version of what is actually the most prevailing kind of approach to improvement. Putting yourself on a diet is a stop it approach to your overeating, behavior. And as I said earlier, it can even look like it works for a while, because if you have enough motivation to lose weight, to change the way you eat, you will lose weight. People lose weight on diets. The problem is 6, 9, 12 months later, they've regained the weight, typically plus 7%, according to many studies. And why is this? I mean, the fast answer is because all the person has done is temporarily change their behavior. They haven't changed the underlying mindset that is giving rise to the behavior. And that's why in our third step, we're not going to come up with some smart plan, some behavior change diet that makes all this logical sense in the world. And if only you can commit to it and stick with it, you'll be able to change. If you do that, you will change temporarily. This is trusting to willpower. And while people may differ with respect to how much willpower they have, no one has an infinite supply. Eventually, it runs out. The mindset underneath our behavior has not changed, and so things go back to the way they were. That's why we're going to take a little less direct route, go a bit slow, in order to come up with a platform, a much more powerful platform that you can then try on for yourselves after this session, that will arguably make it much more likely that you're able to bring about the change that you were generously discussing just a moment ago in your breakouts, to which you will shortly be returning. So if we're not going to come up with a smart plan, so to speak, in the third column, what are we going to do? See if I can get my screen back up on the thing here. Yes, we're going to turn to this idea without going into a big, long neuroscience lecture. That we have this extraordinary evolving equipment up there, between our ears. We have these brains, and these brains have different compartments, divisions, you might say, of labor. We have the part of our brain that is able to form intentions, make plans, assess how well we're doing, with those plans and so on. This is the neocortex, the part of the brain that can store and retrieve information, that can analyze, form intentions, plans, try to carry them out. We at the end of the day, we all went to the same graduate school, the graduate school of the neocortex. I mean, even in American higher education tends to put most of its chips on the neocortex. When you look at failure autopsies among professionals, it's rarely because they missed a week that a certain subject was being taught. We fail more often because of the suboptimal ways that we handle our interior emotions, how we handle anxiety, how we handle disappointment, and so on. That has nothing to do really with the neocortex. It has to do with another part of the brain in the limbic system that handles and regulates our emotions. We all have, for example, the part of the brain that is monitoring the world for threat or danger, the amygdala. And even though it's funny, I mean, I'm as old as I am, I can, it's interesting to me to see that, a concept like the amygdala, a kind of esoteric, you know, brain part has found its way out of the shadows of academia into, public life. I mean, most organizations talk about, amygdala hijacks and things like that today. So it has certainly become a much more, widely understood concept, but it is still, I would say, regarded as a kind of problem. It's almost like the amygdala is some annoying roommate that you let move in early on and you haven't been able to get it to leave. And it's your job as a good professional to figure out how you can handle your amygdala. In my view, the amygdala is a hero, okay? It can provide challenges for us, but it has an awful lot to do with why we are as successful a species as we are. The fact that we have a part of us that is scanning the world for danger and threat and possible loss is an enormous asset. And it deserves not just to be looked at as a problem to handle, but something actually, to be respected. All of this is to say, as I was saying at the beginning, that yes, we have, we can form intentions or goals, or like, I said, commitments that I have, like I have a commitment to be more receptive to new ideas. But in addition to sort of the commitments that I have, I was suggesting to you earlier, it's good for us to know the commitments that have us, the ones that are running us more than we are running them. You could call it the blind side. And since they typically are out of sight, I cannot just say, okay, be brave and honest. I'll stop talking. Let's keep the room quiet. Please write down all your hidden commitments. That's just not going to work by definition. So we have a way of sort of sneaking up on them in a kind of two-step process. And if you look at your maps there in the third column, you'll see that the column is actually divided up into a kind of upper third where you have this little box that we call the worry box or the alarm box. I often call it as well, the alarm box, because you're going to fill it up in a moment with a bunch of negative emotions, not necessarily just worries, but forms of alarm. And what you're going to enter there is not yet this interesting animal, these competing commitments, but you'll see that they're the raw material that will get us there. So for the next moment, let's just forget about everything else but the worry box and just see if we can get really good entries into that box. Now, which negative emotions am I talking about? This is where we can kind of cash in your brave honesty in column 2. Because in a moment, I'm going to ask you to go back to the second column. You'll see there a bunch of kind of generalizations of sort of ordinary scenarios, little dramas from your personal life or your work life, depending on the nature of the goal that you've chosen. Like in his case, there he is, communicating too much to others that they should check back with him, whatever. What I'm going to ask each of you to do is to go back to each one of those entries and kind of identify a real instance of this, a real, because you just have a generalization, but come up with a real instance. So this person was thinking of a situation, where, he was about to jump in and make sure people would check back with him, whatever. After you've identified a real instance, I invite you to kind of vicariously cast yourself into that situation. And then imagine yourself doing the opposite of what you would normally do. So for him, the opposite might just be keeping his mouth shut and, not, somehow signaling that they needed to check back with him. Now, that was a lot of words from me. I could have much more quickly said, take a look at column 2. What do you think you wouldn't like about doing the opposite of each of those things? But if I said that, that's just what you would do. You would think about what you wouldn't like about doing the opposite. And in this next very important step in our process, I want you to see if you can metaphorically get below your neck and not just be thinking about what you wouldn't like. I want to see if you can have a little sample of the experience of what you wouldn't like. And the way you'll have that experience is by vicariously casting yourself into a real instance of each of the things in your second column. Imagine yourself even just trying to do the opposite. And that is going to generate some version of it is to say some kind of threat, okay? It is going to intentionally trigger your amygdala a little bit. And you're doing this not out of any masochistic impulse, but because you want to actually capture a little bit in this worry box. What is the real threat for me in doing the opposite? What is the loss? What is the loss that some part of me imagines will result from my doing this? I call this step meeting our monsters. Meeting our monsters. We all have these, sleeping monsters inside, that, oh, people won't love me, people won't respect me, people won't admire me, people won't do what I need them to do, whatever the thing might be. And the purpose of this next step is to meet a few of your monsters, try to understand better, what alarm comes up for you when you imagine doing the opposite. Now, let me just give a couple quick examples and then I'll shut up and let you do this. Just sticking with the one that's up on the screen here, as he thought, or not just thought about, but vicariously imagined himself doing the opposite in each situation, what were some of the things he came up with? Things won't go the way I want them to go. Should be like a big red exclamation mark after that. Things won't go the way I want them to go. I'll become more marginal. I'll become, less relevant. I'll lose what I most enjoy in the work. Okay, these are just examples of some of his monsters. That things won't go the way I want them to go. I'll become more marginal, less relevant. I'll lose what I most enjoy in the work. If we go to that person who wanted to give up the imposter syndrome, let's take a quick look at that one. I will show you some of hers. Forget everything else. Let's just focus here. So it's, if I didn't do these things, stay in my comfort zone, discredit myself, over consult. What are some of the worries? I might make a bad decision and look inept or naive. Other people, especially my partners, might think less of me, lose respect or confidence in me. It might damage my reputation. I'll show I'm clueless. I'll dwell on my mistakes and beat myself up. Okay, those are her monsters. Okay, your turn. I'm going to stop talking. Let me give you 2 minutes. Go back to column 2. Cast yourself into real instances of those situations. Imagine yourself doing the opposite. See if you can identify a few of those monsters. One last little point. We've learned that most people aren't terrifically good at this. I mean, most people, I'm trying to get you below your neck into your guts, right? That's where the monsters are. But some people are very good at getting right down to what is really the underlying most precious thing that's going to be lost. But most people only get, let's say, chest high and don't get all the way down to their guts. So here's a little tip for if you don't get to some really threatening kind of thing, how can you take it down, a notch or two? Just ask whatever first occurred to you, as the worry. One more question. And what would be the worst about that for me? What would be the real bigger loss for me? That will usually get you down closer to the monster. Okay, over to you for a couple minutes, just filling in your worry box. Okay, I gave you even more than 30 seconds. Just so generous. So hopefully you have identified a few of your monsters, a few of these threats that come up. And they're always about, the loss of something, the loss of control, the loss of how someone else will regard us, whatever it might be. And it's very useful to identify the monsters, but something of much greater power and possibility results if we consider that we don't just have these worries or these alarms. We spend energy to keep the lid on the worry box. We spend energy to make sure that the thing we're worried about does not occur. I may not just have the worry that you'll feel like I don't deserve my job. I spend energy to try to make sure that you don't have that feeling. It's the energy that we spend to keep the lid on the worry box that is the essence of these now not so hidden commitments. They're all commitments to self protection. And this means that the next step does not involve any real analysis or self reflection on your part. It just involves essentially following the momentum of having identified the worry. And essentially, it's a simple syntactic shift that is going to bring about an interesting and non simple picture or phenomenon. That simple syntactic shift is just shifting from the worry that I might make a bad decision or look naive to my considering that there may be some part of me that is in the grip of a commitment to never making a bad decision or to never looking naive. That's the way in which I say it's a simple conversion from a passive worry, I'll look naive, to recognizing that I might be spending energies to make sure that I don't look naive. So let's, sticking with the example that's on the screen, you see what the worries were up there, that I might make a bad decision, that I'll look inept or naive. These suggest, and don't even analyze it, just follow the momentum. They'll seem weird to you. It's not like you get up in the morning and you say, I'm committed to never looking bad in front of my partners. That's what it means to say that they're hidden. But that might still be a very powerful way that this person is spending energy. So the worries are, I might make a bad decision, look inept, naive, and so on. You see the commitments. I'm committed to never looking bad in front of my partners, to never making a big mistake, to not saying something stupid, to not risk the loss of other people's respect or confidence, to not be filled with regrets for my misactions or missteps. Now, notice this didn't involve any big further self inspection or reflection or any big inferential leaps. The person just stuck with their worries in the worry box that are passive and shifted them into a more active form. And when they do that, the sheet pops from being just a bunch of notes in response to a random set of questions and moves from kind of this vertical approach that we've been taken to a more horizontal approach, looking across. Once you see that these commitments might be driving you, now all these behaviors look completely intelligent, sensible. She should keep on doing every single one of these things in service of these commitments over here. But when she does, she makes it, or he makes it, impossible to accomplish the first column goal. So they begin to see this thing we call the system, the immune system, protecting myself from these kinds of losses. I do these behaviors that keep me from accomplishing my goal, which is, I'm acknowledging, temporarily a bit discouraging, but I'm promising we're not ending the program here, okay? If we were to end the program here, it would be, I asked you to come and join me for a couple of hours in order for me to demonstrate to you that in spite of your genuine desire to make progress on whatever is in your first column goal, you never will. Thank you very much. I hope you loved the session. That's the way it's going to feel temporarily, because you're going to see that you've created a brilliant system that keeps the lid on the worry box, but at a cost. And the cost is no hope of accomplishing this goal. Now, I want to just say one more thing to help increase the chances you do these simple conversions from passive worries into these more active commitments to keep a bad thing from happening. The most common way that people go wrong in this next step is kind of like this. So here's the very same maps, very same worries in the worry box. And then, okay, what are the person's commitments? I'm committed to believing more in myself. I'm committed to leaning in. I'm committed to realizing nobody's perfect. I shouldn't obsess so much about what other people think of me. This is the normal way we understand the word commitment, so it's kind of understandable that people go astray this way. Notice that these are more like first column commitments, ways you want to improve in the future. Listen very carefully. Third column commitments are not commitments to the future. They're commitments you are coming to see you are fulfilling right now in the present. This person is right now fulfilling the commitment to never look bad in front of his or her partners. And how is this person fulfilling this commitment? By doing the things that are here in the second column, over checking, over consulting, all that kind of thing. So make sure that the commitments you come up with here, they're not commitments to a better future, like you raise your hand at the end of an offsite and say, I promise that I'm going to, spend more time with my direct reports or whatever. These are not commitments to the future. These are commitments you're coming to see you are fulfilling right now. And how are you fulfilling them? By doing all these brilliant counterproductive things in column 2. Okay, let me stop talking and give you a couple minutes. We will very shortly be taking a body break, I promise. But let me give you a first shot at seeing whether you can convert the worries or alarms into commitments to keep that thing you're worried about from occurring. Seeing how that is a commitment right now in the present, and the way you are fulfilling it is by the behaviors in column 2. Okay, now I know some of you might want more time, and you will get it, but kind of after we come back from the break. And I know for some of you, you can actually see your system now. You can see how you have one foot on the gas pedal over here in column 1. You really want to make progress here, but you can now see that you have another foot on the brake. You can see this system, a kind of equilibrium. We call that system an immune system because we believe that the mind, like the body, is in possession of this extraordinary instrument that has no other purpose than to protect us. It's not a problem that needs a solution. It's not an illness that needs a cure. Our immune systems, most of the time, are working beautifully and keep us out of trouble. But sometimes our immune systems can make mistakes. Your body's immune system could regard an organ that needs to be transplanted into your body as an enemy intruder, and it would do everything it could to resist the metabolizing of that organ. Similarly, your mind's immune system can regard something as a threat or a loss, which actually may not be. So our immune systems are not always perfect threat detectors. We'll get into more of this when we come back from the break. I'm also aware that for some of you, the whole thing isn't making sense yet. You haven't put the thing together. The map hasn't popped yet. That's not your fault. Okay. We're basically laying down new neural pathways here, and it can take a few passes to get it right. And when we come back from the break, you'll shortly be in your small breakouts, and you can be helping each other. So don't despair if the thing hasn't popped yet for you. But I have held you now for more than an hour and a half, which is, the legal limit here. So let's give everybody a 10-minute body break. Do whatever you choose. But the one thing I would invite all of you to do is, at the very least, stand up, get out of your chair, move around a little bit. See you back here in 10 minutes. Okay, so you're in the process of, hopefully this is the moment now, and in the breakout, when you come back from the breakout, the hope is that all of your maps have popped. That is to say, your electronic sheet isn't any longer just a repository for a bunch of notes in response to 3 separate questions or 4. You can rather see a single system or equilibrium across these 3 columns. This system we call the immune system. And I know that some of you can see yours right now, and some of you still can't, which is what normally happens. But for those who can't, let me just take one more moment, give you another example maybe it will be helpful. So here's an example from the work we've done in the health sector around a huge uh, kind of patient challenge, and that is, we can as a society invest billions of dollars in amazing pharmaceuticals, and then people won't take the drugs. And that's a whole problem that isn't going to be solved, by pharmaceutical research. That's going to require understanding a little bit more what's going on, in people's internal operating systems. One of the biggest examples of this is that as you get older, you're going to be more likely to be prescribed what is typically called a maintenance medication. I myself, for example, am in pretty good health, but a number of years ago, my doctor didn't like how high my bad cholesterol was, and she said this was largely, inherited, genetic, couldn't be changed all that much by diet alone. She said, "I'm going to prescribe a statin drug. I want you to take it every night for the rest of your life." And I do take it. It does reduce my bad cholesterol. She's happy and I'm happy. But in this respect, it turns out that I'm a little bit in the minority because when studies are done on people prescribed maintenance medications, and the first thing that's, checked with people, kind of when they come out of the doctor's office or shortly thereafter, what were you prescribed? Why were you prescribed it? Very high levels of understanding. Then you ask people, so what do you think the odds are if I come back a year from now to check to see whether you have faithfully taken the drug as prescribed, typically every day, that you're going to be able to say yes? And the typical response to that is, you know, what part of I could have a stroke and die didn't you understand? People say things like, the doctor told me, that I could have a stroke and die if I don't do this, that it has no negative side effects typically. It's covered by my insurance. So what are the chances that I'm going to, take it every day? I think 100%. Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? Turns out to be a really good question, as turns out, because when they do go back a year, what they find is 50, several studies now, it's always like 53 to 57% of the population, the sample, is not taking the drug regularly. Huge, huge problem. And by not taking it regularly, I don't mean that they've all just discontinued. They take it irregularly, they don't refill it promptly, and so on. So we did a study with 100 people who were all prescribed 2 or more maintenance medications. They all wanted to be adherent, and none of them were. Okay, in order to get into the study, you had to not be following the doctor's orders, and you had to want to. Okay, that's exactly our sweet spot. Changes you want to make, but somehow find that you're unable to do it. And I'm going to take you very quickly through one person's real map. Everybody's was a little different, but you'll get the idea because it's fascinating. So they all had pretty much the same first column goal, to get better and follow their doctor's orders. So for this person, I'm giving you an abbreviated version of this for time, but like what was in the second column? You have to tell on yourself all your counterproductive actions, right? I don't take them regularly. I stop for long periods. I don't refill them promptly. When I get a voicemail message from the pharmacy telling me it's time to refill I just delete the message in the middle of the message, right? All these behaviors are counterproductive. Then I next wanted, as I just earlier did with you, to help him fill, his worry box, his alarm box. And I said to him, listen carefully now, I said to him, so what would be the worst for you, if you did take these medications every single day as prescribed? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, the worst thing for me here is if I don't start taking these medications, I could have a stroke and die. Okay, now I hope you can hear that that is not an answer to my question, right? I asked him what would be the worst if you did take the medication. He looked me right in the eye and he told me the worst is if I don't start taking the medication, I could have a stroke and die. Now, this is a perfectly intelligent person. This is a really good example of what we mean by neural pathways. I think that he had a very well-trodden neural pathway for not taking the medication. And that he probably walked down that path many times a day. And if you could hear the words, on that path, Not that they're actually like spoken internally, but if you could somehow tap into what's going on as he walked down that path, it would probably sound something like this. This is ridiculous. I've got to start taking this medication. I've got to start taking it every single day. If I don't take it every single day, I could have a stroke and die. Starting now and from now and forever, I'm going to take this drug every single day. If I don't, I could have a stroke and die. Okay. I don't think he had any neural pathway for the question I asked him. The question I asked is, what is the horror? What is the loss? What is the monster if you do take the drug every single day? I don't think he had any pathway for that, but it sounded a lot like something for which he did have a pathway. So without even realizing, he jumped on the highway that he'd already paved, and he answered a different question than the one I asked. So I had to say to him, of course, sir, I understand that if you don't take the medication, you worry that you'll have a stroke and die. But just stick with me here because I'm really asking you something a little bit different. I want you to imagine that there you are taking the drug every single day, just like the doctor. If I have to take that damn medication every single day, he said, interrupting me, I would feel like an old sick man. I tell you, I would feel like somebody more in my parents' generation, like my father, who's in a nursing home, by the way, and I'm not visiting him. Oof, okay. All this stuff, came out. It's like, wow, you got some very strong feelings. Well, you're damn right I do. He said, I'm not some half dead guy on life supports who has to think about taking a medication every day just to get through his day. Okay, now we are getting somewhere. Now we're getting to the monsters. Now we're getting to what is the threat or danger? The alarm for him. There's one alarm that if I don't start taking it, I'm going to have a stroke and die. He knows about that. But there's another alarm. If I do start taking it, if I do have to think about this every day, I'm going to feel like an old, sick man. That's what's in the worry box. So, what is his hidden commitment? His hidden commitment is, I'm committed to start taking my drug. That's what's in the first column. His hidden commitment is, you know, I'm committed to not feeling like an old, sick, over the hill man. I'm committed to not accepting that I'm somehow on my way out. Notice these are not commitments to the future. These are commitments he is brilliantly fulfilling right now in the present. And how is he fulfilling a commitment to not feeling like an old, sick, over the hill man? By doing these behaviors. He should keep doing them. He should do them more. The more he does them, the more he will fulfill these commitments, but he will not be able to accomplish this commitment. That's as I said, you have to go down into the valley of the shadow of death. He's right down here. This is his system. The system is actually built to protect him from feeling like an old sick man. It's a commitment he fulfills in the present by this behavior, which keeps him from accomplishing the goal, right? Okay. So make sure that your worry box is not just filled with strong worries, but worries about doing the opposite of column 2. His initial worries are, I worry I'll have a stroke and die. That's not a worry if he fails, if he did the opposite of these, right? Okay, so make sure your worries in the worry box are worries about doing the opposite of this. And then it's a simple conversion. I worry I'll feel like an old man. I don't want to feel like an old sick man. It's pretty simple conversion. The third column commitments are commitments to not have the thing you're worried about occur. You can sometimes run into a little grammatical problem, a syntax problem, if the worry is framed itself in the negative. Like my worry is I won't be listened to. Then what is the commitment? The commitment is I'm committed to not being not listened to. Okay, you can't say that. That is literally true, but it's the not problem. So you might have to, introduce a different word like I'm committed to not being ignored. Okay. But other than that, it should be pretty simple to convert your worries into these commitments to not have the thing you're worried about occur. And when you do, it should be a commitment in the present, a commitment to avoiding loss, a commitment to self-protection. And I want to say very clearly that I don't think there's anything wrong with protecting ourselves. This is the other thing. Everybody says, oh, it's your defenses. Like defenses are some bad thing. If I didn't respect myself, I wouldn't seek to protect myself. So your third column commitments are commitments to self-protection. That's what an immune system does. It protects you. That's a beautiful thing. Okay, time to return to your small groups. In those small groups, you're going to have another 12 minutes, 4 minutes apiece. Try to keep it track a little bit of the time so everybody has a good chance to check in if they wish. We have now, through the brilliance of Megan, enabled your abilities to share your screens in your breakouts. Thank you, Megan. And I suggest you do because there's more and more print now on the page. And you can when it's your turn, if you're willing to share your screen, the first thing is kind of like, I don't see what he's talking about. I don't get it. I don't see my system. I don't see 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake. I don't get it. That's fine if you don't, and you can use the small group, see if your colleagues can kind of help you, sharpen it up. And if you do see it, then you can just present it. And as a listener, all you're trying to do is just, do you see it now? Do you see how your colleagues' second column counterproductive behaviors make all the sense in the world in light of these third column commitments? And if you don't see it, you should say so, because that will often help your colleagues to sharpen their map. Hopefully, when we come back in 12 minutes, we'll take a poll, but we'll check in and see, do you all see your system? And I'm also just wanting to acknowledge it's a little uncomfortable to see that system. After all, you really want to accomplish what's in this column, and you're now seeing that your system, is doing a terrific job protecting you, but it's charging you a tax. And that tax is, it's going to be very hard to accomplish this goal. So there's another part of you that could say, yes, I see it, but what can we do about it? I promise that's what we'll turn to when you come back from the break. But I want to make sure that everybody can see their system before we take the next step. See you back here in 12 minutes. Just to be clear where we are and where we are not, Einstein said that it can be more important to get the problem right than the solution. So I want to be clear, we haven't come to any solution yet, but what we've been working on, what you've been working on very hard and bravely, is getting a clearer picture, so to speak, of the problem space. What is the internal operating model, which is serving very powerful functions of self-protection, but which is also making it difficult to make much progress on the first column goal? Because once we have a better picture of the problem, then we're in a whole different position to work on it than kind of the willpower New Year's resolution, kind of trying real hard to change kind of approach. And if you can see it, then as I said, you were like, okay, enough. Now let's get to the solution, and I will get there. But let's just do another quick poll to check in and see, essentially, kind of like, do you see your system? I'm not asking if you see a solution yet. I'm not asking if you see your way out of this. I'm just asking, does your sheet of paper now have some kind of power for you because you can see a system there? You can see why it's hard to make that change, that accomplish that first column goal, because you can see that the second column behaviors serve a purpose to the side of us that understandably wants to protect ourselves from loss. So we'd like to have as many people at 4 or 5 as possible. Right now we've got about 65% of you. Okay, so about, yeah, let's say now it's 50, 60, yeah. So about 2/3 of you, are seeing it. And my hope is that as we move forward, it'll get clearer to those of you who do not yet, see it. So thank you for that. I'm going to end the poll. And let's, let's just identify kind of the question that now emerges. Now that you can see that this, if we had the time and you had the inclination, we could do an exploration of the ways in which your system has contributed in many ways, to, your success, the ways in which your system has benefited you. But the one thing we can say for sure about your system is that it is not fit for the purpose of accomplishing the goal in your first column, because it is actually going to generate the very behaviors here that keep you from accomplishing that goal. And if what's in the first column is actually not that important to you, then consciously or unconsciously, what people tend to do is say, basically, you know what, this is all very interesting. I should think more about this. I'll think about it tomorrow, like Scarlett O'Hara said in Gone with the Wind. In other words, I'm never going to think about it because I don't want to mess with the system. The system is doing a really great job keeping the lid on the worry box, fulfilling these commitments. So, you know what? The heck with my first column goal. I'm just going to forget all about it. But if what's in the first column is really important to you, then although one side of you might say, I'm not going to mess with this system, the other part of you says, but we've got to mess with this system because we really want to make progress on this goal. That's why it needed to be a 4 or a 5 in importance to basically create for you a really good problem. The kind of problem that you don't want to solve so much as you want it to solve you, the kinds of problems you can grow on. Problems you can grow on, you don't try to solve. Because when you solve a problem, you can be pretty sure you're the same person coming out of the problem as you were going into it. The problems we grow on are the problems that by engaging them, they solve us. They bring us up against our limits, basically show us our growing edge, and basically invite us to cross that line into a bigger and better version of ourselves. This is an adult developmental exercise. The question that arises, as I said, is this system, which has benefited you in many ways, but is not fit for the purpose of accomplishing your first column goal, is this system the last system of self-protection you will construct and will then live in for the rest of your lives? Or can you construct a roomier system of self-protection that will enable you to make moves that currently you can't make because some part of you wants to protect yourself from loss? That's the question. Can we actually transcend the limits of this self-protective system to create a new one? Notice this is not me saying, quit being such a baby, quit protecting yourself. There's nothing juvenile about protecting yourself. We will always need a good immune system. We've never before, since the advent of COVID, had a period in which the entire human race is aware of the value of a good immune system. The question is your immune system due for an upgrade? And the way you take up that question is to turn to the fourth column. And the fourth column is about this idea that, yes, we have these systems of self-protection, and those systems rest on certain fundamental beliefs or premises. We call them big assumptions. And by big, what we mean is, although they are actually technically just assumptions, we aren't taking them as assumptions. We have no curiosity about them. We take them as true. I just assume that if I give you critical feedback, our relationship will be damaged, something like this, whatever it might be. And we are all, in other words, in the grip of some fundamental assumptions which keep the third column commitments continuing to feel necessary. So I want to take a few minutes to help you begin to generate even a starting list of some of your own big assumptions. You can all see my screen, right? Still? Okay, yes, thank you. Okay. Some of your own big assumptions. And then I'm going to show you that these assumptions are like doorways you can pass through, or like unwrapped Christmas presents. They're actually gifts that you haven't yet explored. But before you can unwrap them or walk through their doorway, we need to kind of get them on the table. So how do we, to be very concrete, how do we fill the fourth column? How do we start generating what are some of our own big assumptions? The way to do that is to go back to the third column commitments and look at them a little bit at arm's length. And I would start by looking at the collection of assumptions as the collection of third column commitments as a whole. Looking at that collection of third column commitments as a whole, almost as if they were someone else's. If I were to ask you, what assumption do you think this person, it's you, but you're kind of taking a third person perspective, what assumption do you think this person might be making that is kind of reflective of the collection of third column commitments? Like I've asked that to people, and I've had people say back to me, this person, if I look at their third column self-protective commitments, this person must be assuming the world is a pretty dangerous place. Or somebody might say to me, this person must be assuming that they're walking on pretty thin ice. Things might be going fine, but at any moment, you can walk into, fall into a hole or something like that. My first invitation to you, and I'll stop talking and give you a minute to think about this, just as a start, is to consider when you look at your self-protective commitments as a whole, are there any, sort of macro assumptions that kind of suggest themselves, like the ones you see up here on the screen? And I want to remind you that everything in the fourth column, or let me put it this way, nothing in the fourth column we are presuming is something that 100% of you ascribes to. I want to warn you that big assumptions often embarrass us because the more rational side of us will sometimes say, I know this is not true, but some part of you is still in its grip. So it may be only a small part of you that is in the grip of that big assumption, but that small part is having a big influence. So this isn't all of column 4, but just as a starter, let me be quiet for a minute and just give you a chance to see whether there are any assumptions that kind of occur to you that this person, namely you, this person, some part of this person must be making given their collection of third column commitments. Take a minute on that. Okay, now I want to move on to another question. These are all going to just be ways of kind of helping you fill the fourth column. And that is to take a look at each of the third column commitments on its own. And one at a time, ask yourself, what assumption must some part of me be making that keeps that particular third column commitment continuing to feel necessary? And these kinds of assumptions are often best constructed, in this kind of if-then frame, which is a common frame for assumptions. I assume if it rains, then we won't go on the picnic. Looking at each of the third column commitments on their own, can you identify an assumption that underlies each of them that some part of you must be making to keep that commitment feeling necessary? Let me give you another minute or two on that. And I'll give you then one more way of helping fill the fourth column. Okay, now I want to just show you one more way of helping you fill the fourth column. It's a little bit more formulaic, kind of like an assumption generating machine. So if we go for these if-thens, I assume that if X, then Y, okay? So you can take each of your third column commitments and enter the opposite of a third column commitment in the if clause. So I am committed to never losing control. It's a very common one that many of us may discover. So it would be the opposite. So it would be if I do lose control, I assume that if I do lose control, then what? And then it would be up to you to complete that sentence. So you could just put in the opposite of each of the third column commitments. I'm committed to never making a mistake. So I assume if I do make a mistake, then what? And the answer should be something pretty horrible, right? Some part of you is assuming that will be the end of the world. You can also put the opposite of the third column commitment in the then clause. So I'm committed to never losing control. So it would be if X, I assume that if X, then I will lose control. What is X? I assume, some part of me assumes if I actually do delegate more, then I'll lose control. Interesting assumption. Is it true? Might be true, might not be true. So you can also generate assumptions by putting the opposite of the third column commitment into the then clause and then filling in, what is in the if clause. Okay, this is my last pass here on this. Let me be quiet again, give you another 2 minutes and see if this helps you kind of generate a few more assumptions for your fourth column. And then we'll come to what is the value of identifying these assumptions. Okay, so the hope is that one way or another, or through some combination of those different approaches, you've begun to generate some big assumptions of your own. These are assumptions which some part of you may feel like, I already know intellectually that these aren't true, but still some part of me feels it is. Others, you might look at them and say, what do you mean an assumption? I'm absolutely certain that this horrible thing would occur. And you're absolutely, convinced it's true. And others, you might say, to be honest, I don't know if it's true or not. So in a way, you don't have to worry about how true or not true you think it is. It's just identifying that some part of you is regarding it as true. Just as examples, if we stick with this guy, wanted to be more receptive to new ideas, but he wasn't being that way. And then he realized he had commitments to not lose control over how things go and to, see himself as kind of the person who's running things, to be the company's hero and so on. What were some of, so that's his system. What are some of the assumptions that keep this whole system going? Well, some part of him, a bit sheepishly comes to acknowledge, I have this assumption that my way is the right way. I have another part of me has an assumption that the others aren't actually ready to lead on their own. Another one, there's no way to feel that I'm having impact and contributing if I'm not at the wheel kind of driving things. Or I might also have the assumption that the satisfactions of leading like a coach from the sidelines are going to be much less than the satisfactions of actually being the prime mover on the field. All of these assumptions, just taken as true without exploring them, if you just take them as true, then we see how these third column commitments continue to feel necessary. And if these are necessary, they will then generate these behaviors, and those behaviors will keep us from accomplishing the goal. But are all these assumptions actually true? Are they all actually necessary? And this brings us to, I'm sure it'll be a very clear statement I'm about to make, which is that some of our big assumptions are like a rhinoceros's horn. I'm sure you all agree. Now, what do I mean by that? So here we have a rhinoceros who is an artist, apparently likes to draw landscapes, but there is kind of an interesting feature to all of his landscapes. There's this big conical triangular shape in the middle of every one of his canvases. Now, if I were to ask you, what is that conical shape? You're going to tell me it's the rhinoceros's horn. But if we ask the rhinoceros, he's going to tell you, no, I'm just faithfully representing what I see in the world as I look out onto the world. And some of our big assumptions are like our own rhinoceros's horn. A big assumption is a filter through which we look at the world. And if that assumption is true, then the filter is transparent and clear. But if that assumption is a distortion in some way, then what we're actually seeing when we think we're looking at the world is our own distortion of that world. And that's where we start on a different pathway for change than just trying real hard to change our behavior, like the Bob Newhart stop it approach. We've seen why stop it doesn't work. It doesn't work because all those behaviors in the second column feel necessary to us, right? They feel necessary because we think, that we're going to suffer a big loss if we don't. I mean, the what every person's immune system does, the picture of the immune system, is it shows you kind of what I will call the two big endeavors of being a human being, if you'll permit me a lofty perch here for a moment. One big endeavor of being a human being is essentially to honor the miracle that we are living beings, that we are continuously unfolding or have the potential to, that we can keep growing and developing. Something we share with every other living being. A caterpillar is not meant to just become a bigger and stronger caterpillar, which is what the strength-based approach, to talent and people development will get you. It'll get you maybe stronger and bigger caterpillars. But a caterpillar has a destiny to be more than just a bigger and stronger caterpillar. It has the potential to grow wings and transcend its earthbound captivity. We too have the potential to keep growing and developing. And your first column aspiration, whatever it might be, is just one instance of your taking up the first of these endeavors, which is to grow. This endeavor, by the way, is one that our public institutions and work settings is very comfortable with. The language of business and also nonprofits is often about growth. Whether you want to grow the membership of a church or grow the bottom line revenue of a company, people tend to be quite comfortable with the goal of growth. Okay. And then we tend to put all our chips on that goal alone, and let's support people's desire to grow. You want to change, okay, I'm going to help you. And you get down the path of basically stop the counterproductive behaviors, trying real hard. And you ignore the fact that there's a second fundamental endeavor to being a human being, which is just as powerful and just as honorable as the first, even though our public institutions are much less comfortable with the second endeavor. What is the second endeavor? If I were to put it most starkly, I would say that the second endeavor is to not die. We want to grow, and we also don't want to die. Or from a psychological point of view, we don't want to suffer big losses. Your immune system shows you kind of not only the way you want to grow, but the way you don't want to die. The losses you want to protect yourself from. And your notion of those losses rests on a certain set of assumptions that you are taking as true. What is the new pathway toward improvement that this whole workshop, this whole session is about? It's not about shifting effort from I'm going to try real hard to change my behavior to I'm going to try real hard to change my mind. That is not what it's about. It's not about effort at all. You can't sit down and try real hard to change your belief, that others, will screw it up, or that, they don't care about it or whatever. You can't convince yourself that your assumptions are faulty. You have to have the direct experience of how some of your big assumptions are actually due for modification. And that takes us kind of to the last phase of things here, which is how do you look at your big assumptions as a kind of unwrapped, gift? How do you look at it as a doorway you haven't walked through? How do you unwrap it or walk through it? Actually, I have a question for you now, Megan. I should have asked you at the start, which is, do you have a second page of the sort of the flip side of this page for designing a first experiment?
No, I don't.
I
Okay,
can send that in the chat right now, Bob, if you like.
Okay, that's fine. But I can also just talk everybody through it. It's pretty simple. So you can't open 6 birthday gifts at the same time. You can't walk through 7 doorways at the same time. So you have to start somewhere. So the first step is to scan the list of big assumptions, which isn't exhaustive. There's probably another 100, but you've made a good start. Just take the list that you've come up with, scan that list, and circle the one, or just identify, choose the one you're aware you have some energy and interest to explore. You may have a lot of skepticism as to whether you could actually change your mind about it, but you can see that if you could, it would make a big difference. It would enable you to take your foot a bit off the brakes here in the third column, which will have all these good knock-on effects. So let me just be quiet and just give you 30 seconds scanning that list. Which of these birthday presents or Christmas presents do you want to open first? Which of these big assumptions do you want to begin to explore? And then I'm going to show you what exploration means. Okay, hopefully you've picked one. You don't have to agonize. If there are several, that's a great thing, right? Because it's not like you're not going to get to the other ones. You're just starting somewhere. So you've found one that you want to start with. And what does it mean to start with it? To put it most simply, it means giving the world a chance to show you what it has been basically dying to show you for years and years about your big assumption. It essentially amounts to kind of designing a first experiment that where you kind of dip your toes a bit in waters you don't normally swim in, probably run a little experiment that runs counter to your assumption to see what happens, essentially, to see what the world wants to show you about how valid that assumption is. So I'm gonna double click on this idea for a moment, help you kind of begin to design a first experiment, and then bring you back one last time to your small groups where you can share with each other your kind of in-process developments of your first experiments, so that you're kind of ready, to actually run them if you wish after this session. So a good experiment has 5 characteristics that we can remember through the English acronym SMART, okay? A first experiment is, first of all, safe. The S stands for safe. So if you, well, let's say, you have the assumption that if I delegate, people will screw it up. It'll be all my fault. It's going to be horrible. People will think less of me as a leader because I'll return poor results because I delegated, whatever. Okay, so first of all, your assumption shows you that you're kind of drawing a line here, and you don't cross that line. You're standing over here on the safe side of that line, and your assumption shows you there is a world you don't enter. There is a bigger world, but you don't enter here. This is the world on the right side of this line where you delegate more, okay? And your big assumption shows you that there is a whole world, but you don't go there because your big assumption tells you, there's danger if you go here, you'll die if you go over here. You'll suffer some big kind of loss. So you stay over on the safe side of the line. So what is a first experiment? A first experiment is not, I'm going to just jump in these waters and see if I die. Okay? No, that would not be safe. I have the assumption if I give critical upward feedback to my boss, I'll be fired. Okay, here's a good first experiment. Go up to your boss and give her the toughest critical upward feedback you can and see if you get fired. No, that's definitely not going to be safe. It could get you information about your assumption. It could also get you fired. Okay, so to stick with my bad cartooning, a first experiment amounts to basically just sticking your toe here, your toe into these waters. Notice that most of you is remaining over here on the safe side of the line. Now you might say to yourself, okay, I get that intellectually, but I don't see any way I can test this assumption. Like my assumption, if I give critical upward feedback to my boss, I'll be fired. What is possible ways there to explore that assumption that is safe? Well, it turns out There's lots of ways to explore it that would be safe. A first experiment is, after all, just a first experiment. It's not supposed to be some single, big, bold, brave experiment that all by itself cuts the Gordian knot and releases you from the limits of that assumption. It's just beginning to dip your toe in. So a first experiment could be just you talk to a couple people, colleagues, who you respect, and you tell them, I have this assumption, what do you think? And if they all tell you, I think you're crazy. I mean, I think you'll get fired if you give her any criticism. She doesn't like criticism. Well, then, okay, maybe you're not going to do that. What if they say, but I think that actually, if you framed it as a question, an inquiry as opposed to, advocating something, I think that actually might be, I think she might actually respect that. Or you might think, nope, that still doesn't feel safe to me. You might just contemplate, do a retrospective analysis from your armchair. Have I ever given critical feedback to our boss? Did I get fired? Do I know anybody on our team who gives critical feedback to the boss? Did they get fired? So if you think about it, there are lots of ways you can actually just dip your toe into these waters. It can sometimes just be as simple as I was suggesting, as letting other people in on what your assumption is and just asking them, what do you think about that assumption? So whatever you come up with the assumption which you have already circled and chosen, or, metaphorically you've circled it, whatever you come up with, and when you bring it into your breakout group in a moment, people are going to be listening and first asking themselves, do I think it's safe? Am I worried for Kathy or Lanny or Nancy or James about their doing this experiment, or Marjorie, or, do I think it's safe? Okay, that's the first thing. The M stands for modest. The experiment in its design should be pretty simple. It shouldn't be so complex that you're going to have to wait 6 months till all the planets line up before you can run a first experiment. After all, what we've done in this workshop is help you each develop your own kind of custom design version of this new approach, to change. And all you've done is build your own vehicle. You still don't really know whether any of the things I'm telling you are actually going to work. So you have to kind of, take it out for a test drive. And you have to be able to sort of get out on the road. So in order to do that, the first experiment has to be pretty simple so you can actually go into action, which is what the A stands for. The A is that the assumption should actually be something you do fairly soon. We say within the next 3 to 5 days, you should run a first experiment. The risks, if you don't, are that we have spent, a few hours together. We've got only 31 minutes left by my count. And what we've actually done, for those of you who are familiar with my developmental theory, development is a process of moving things from subject to object, from a place where we're subject to it and caught up in it, to a place where we can kind of go on the balcony and kind of look at it. And that creates a bigger internal system, a bigger self. And that's what we've done. We've made your immune system object so you can actually look at it and begin to reflect on it, even take actions relative to it. But I can tell you, just from the researcher side of my career, that if you don't get into action and actually start walking down or driving the car down this new path, that you're going to kind of lose connection to the immune system and you're going to get resubjected to it. You're going to get sucked back into it. I mean, we could gather together a year from now and you might have an easier time remembering the immune systems of the 2 people in your small group than you do remembering your own, which is what repression is all about, forgetting for a very good reason. So you have to be able to do something that's safe enough, simple enough that you can do it soon enough. All of which brings us to, what are we actually doing, which is the R. So if you think about action and reflection, you have given me the privilege of holding you a bit for 3 hours in a reflective space, and we are now turning to action. An experiment is action, but we have to be clear what kind of action. It's not the action, this will sound strange given our topic, but the purpose of the action is not to immediately get better. Of course, we hope that ultimately it is going to help you improve on your first column goal. But the purpose of the experiment is not to move a little bit closer to your goal. That's kind of the more technical New Year's resolution willpower approach to improvement. I'd like to lose 20 pounds. I'm going to start on this diet. In a week or two, I don't expect to lose 20 pounds, but I hope I'll lose a little, and that will confirm I've got a good plan and I just need to stick with it. We're not talking about the action of getting a little closer to your improvement goal. You're going to take up action not to get better, but to get information, to learn. So it's a kind of research activity where you're learning something, getting information about what? About the validity of your big assumption. That's the T. The T is for it's a kind of test, a test of the big assumption that you circled. Okay. Now, this is kind of the general idea of a design for a good experiment. Let's get a little more practical. One of the richest sources of inspiration for first experiments is in your second column. In the second column, there's all this counterproductive behavior. You could choose something in that second column and, basically try to do its opposite. Like, let's take, for example, since we use this metaphor of weight and, body weight, and so many of us can relate to that, like I might have a desire to lose weight. In the second column, I don't eat proper portions. I just, the seafood diet. You see food, you eat the food. And, you just keep eating it and enjoying it and so on. Okay. What's, in my worry box? If I have to start limiting the way that I eat, I'm going to feel restricted and confined and maybe depressed. Because after all, food is one of the great pleasures of life. What's my third column commitment? I'm committed to not limiting my joyful life. I'm committed to not feeling controlled. I'm committed to not becoming depressed. I'm just making this up, but as I think about it, it's probably a pretty good facsimile of my map about food. Okay, what's my big assumption? My assumption is if I limit the way that I eat, I'm going to become depressed or whatever. But what might my first experiment be? Well, I could go back to that second column. I don't eat proper portions. Okay, I might have as a first experiment a plan that I'm going to eat proper portions, for 2 weeks. Okay, now this is going to look to the world like Bob is dieting. Okay, but I need to be clear. Why am I doing this? I'm not doing it to lose weight. As it happens, that particular experiment might actually lead to my losing a little weight over those 2 weeks, but that's not why I'm doing it. Why am I doing it? I'm doing it to find out, do I get depressed? Do I feel confined? Do I feel that I'm living a more black and white life rather than technicolor? Is that assumption actually supported or not? That's why I'm doing it. Okay, so let me be quiet and give you a couple of minutes here, sort of like preparation for going into the breakout. You don't have to come up with a fully formed experiment. That can be in part what the breakout's for. You can help each other. But you've circled an assumption. What might be something you do that feels safe enough, simple enough that you could do it soon enough that it gives the world a chance to show you, whether there's some reason to begin doubting that big assumption. I should say that the R and the T together, research and a test, suggest that you're going to have to be able to name what is the data. What are you actually looking for in this little experiment? And need to be clear. What was my data from eating proper portions? It's not how many pounds did I lose, right? The data is always connected to the assumption that's being explored. Did I become depressed? Did I feel that, life had become more constricted? Okay, your turn. Take a couple of minutes. See if you can even begin to come up with a first experiment. Okay, hopefully that is enough time to get you started. As I said, you don't have to have a fully cooked dish to bring to your breakout. You can even have just gotten started with it. You could have gotten a bit stuck, and maybe you can get some help in your breakouts. But you'll have the same 12 minutes, about 4 minutes apiece. You'll first need to let your colleagues know what is the assumption, that you've chosen to begin with. What is that assumption? And then what are you thinking, to do in order to find out what about that assumption? So see you back here in 12 minutes. Okay, so our minutes together are coming down to but a precious few here. To recap, this has been a session to kind of invite you into thinking about a research-based approach to personal improvement that differs from just trying real hard to change your behavior by helping you. Let me turn my video on. I didn't realize it was off. Helping you to better understand your own internal model. A quick summary picture of this, which I thought I had. Yeah, here we go. So, you have a goal, but then you also identify that there are behaviors that are working against that goal. One approach is just the Bob Newhart stop it approach, just quit doing those behaviors, which we know doesn't actually work very well over time. You can do it temporarily, but not over time. Uh, but so our model says, hey, well, let's understand more of the competing commitments that are giving rise to these behaviors. So we see that there's actually a whole system at work here, what we call the mind's immune system. And then how can we actually take a perspective on that system itself? We look at that through recognizing that we have big assumptions that have become lenses through which we look at the world without realizing, that we have our glasses on. And further then, we can look at the lenses, look at our big assumptions. And that's just where we've brought you to here as we are in our closing minutes. I'm hoping that a number of you did take us up on this invitation to not just thank your partners, but to also check in with them. We found that, if you actually make a date, run a first experiment, check in with each other, check in on what was the experiment, what were the results for the big assumption, that you can then decide, do we want to, what's the next experiment we're going to design? You might even choose to, make another date and check in with each other again. We know from a research point of view that if you do even 2 rounds of this, running experiments and holding yourself to a little bit of a disciplined cadence there, where you're checking in with other people, that you'll start to get traction and you'll begin to see that some of these assumptions, which you've been living with for such a long time and have such an influence, actually, can begin to change. So with that, I want to invite each of you to take a moment, if you wish, just to move to chat or whatever, and just to take a second to just kind of think about how you're doing coming out of this fast 3.5 hours that we've spent together, just to see if there are any last thoughts you want to share with me or with the group or whatever. And we can all just kind of take a minute to uh, shift to chat and just kind of look together at the kinds of things, that you might want to say to each other by way of helping you end well. So let's just take a minute or two here in chat. I invite you to just even just a few words or a phrase as to how you're doing or how this has been or anything that you want to share. Yeah, so one of your questions about additional information. So you can go, just Google immunity to change. There's now a huge set of resources you can access. There's talks by Lisa Leahy and by me. I'm sure a number of you know Brene Brown and her work on vulnerability. She has a podcast and did a 2-part podcast with Lisa Leahy about herself working on her own immunity to change. You might want to access that. There are also many books, of ours and others that others have written. So there's all kinds of, materials for you. Uh, some of you may be interested, since we're basically fellow, practitioners, may be interested in developing the skills to facilitate immunity to change yourselves, with others. And you can go to the website Minds at Work, like the mind in your head, all one word, mindsatwork.com. That'll show you all kinds of resources for fellow professionals who want to, make use of this work.